Today's daf is Masechta Gittin Daf Mem Ches. We will begin on Daf Mem Ches Amud Aleph about Mem Ches Mem Zayin Beis, about 8 lines from the bottom, by the Aceway. We were discussing before a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Shlokish. And what's the story? The story is that a person bought a field, and he just, for the sake of benefiting from the fruits, but the deed of the land still remains with its original owner. So the question was regarding Bekurim. Rabbi Yochanan says, maybe Bekoire. A person who does that can still bring the Bekurim and read the Parsha of Bekurim, the Vidu Bekurim, the expression of Arami Avid Avri, and thanking Hashem for the land that you gave me, because even though you only bought the fields for the fruits, here's the point of the whole daf. Rabbi Yochanan holds that kinyan aperis, when you buy fruits, is kinyan aguftami, is as if you bought the whole field, as if the deed transferred over to you, even though it did not. But buying the fruits is like you bought the land itself. Rish Lakish says, no, you only bought the fruits, and therefore you don't own the land. You'll bring Bekurim because you own the fruits, but you don't read the parsha of the Bekurim because you can't say, thank you, Hashem, for giving me this piece of land. Because he holds kinyan aperis, buying the fruits, is not considered as if you bought the land itself. So now the Gemara says, Eisvei, Rabbi Yochanan asked the question for Rish Lakish. We did this yesterday. Eisvei, hoya ba baderech. Person was coming on the way. Ubikuri ishtabiyadai, and he has the first fruits of his wife in his hands. Now, when a person's wife brings in a piece of land, the husband has a right to only eat the fruits, but the deed of the property remain with his wife. Vishama, and as he was bringing the Bekurim to the base of Migdash, he got a telephone call, and he heard that his wife passed on. So maybe he could still bring. Now he owns the entire property. He owns the property plus the fruit. He inherited his wife. So now maybe he brings the Bekurim, the Koreh, and he can read the Parsha of Bekurim. So we have a real good inference over here. Ish Mesa in, only if his wife passed away, that's when he could read the Bekurim, because now he owns the property itself, the deed transferred. Loy Mesa, but if his wife did not pass on, Loy, he would not be able to read the Bekurim because he doesn't own the property. The property still belongs to his wife. So it's a clear proof to Rish Lakish that kinyan peris is lav kinyan aguf. Just buying the fruits, it doesn't mean you own the deed. You own the land itself. So this is a question against Rabbi Yochanan. Answers the Gemara, who hadin, it would same hold true, the Afagav Deloy Mesa, even if his wife did not die, he would still be able to read and bring the Bekurim, of course, he has to, and read the Bekurim, even though he doesn't own the property, because Kinyan Peres, Kinyan Akuf Tumi. But the novelty of the Bryce is to tell you that even though the wife passed on, he would still bring and read the Bekurim. Why not? Because I would have thought he should not read the Bekurim, the Parsha of the Bekurim. Because Ligzar, let us make a Gezerah, because of it could be mistaken for a situation that Rabbi Yosi Bachanina talked about, where in that case, you don't read the Bekurim. Rabbi Yosi Bachanina said, Batzran v'shigram biyad shliach. A man cut the first fruits of his field, and then he used the shliach to send the messenger to bring it to the base of Migdash. When you use the messenger certainly doesn't read the Bekurim because it's not his land. So the only one that could read it is the owner. But the owner is not here. The owner sent a shliach to bring the Bekurim. But what happens? So shliach b'derech, as the shliach got into the base of Migdash, he died, right on the road. So most of the job bringing it to the base of Migdash was done by the shliach, but he never got it to give it to the Kohen. So the owner came to the base of Migdash, and now he wants to bring it to the Kohen and give it to him. Oh, but he's the owner, so maybe you would say that he could read the Bekurim. Maybe ve'enakar, in that case, he could just give it to the Kohen and he doesn't read. Why not? He's the owner, it's his land. So the Rabbi Yosef Bechanina said, Shenama, because the pasuk says, V'lakachta ve'hevesa. When you bring it, you take the first fruits and you bring it. Ad shetei lekicha v'ava ke'echad. Until the one that's taking it and bringing it is the same person, which means as long as from A to Z was done by the owner, that's when you read the Kriyas Abakurim. But if part of it was done with a shliach, then even it was finished off by the owner, he would not read the parsha of the Bikurim. So I would have thought that since the original owner of these fruits was his wife and not him, and then subsequently when his wife passed on, the ownership of that field changed hands. And I might think that in that case, we would tell the husband, maybe ve'ena kari, because you confuse it for the case of Rabbi Yosef Bachanina was talking about, Batzur v'shigram b'yad shliach. So the chiddush of the brisa is that no, by the husband's case will not make any gezerah. So the halacha would be that even when his wife did not die, and he's bringing the bikurim, is maybe v'kari. And even if his wife died, we wouldn't make any gezerah, and we would also say maybe v'kari. Maybe v'kari. May all both cases is maybe v'kari. Kumashmalan. V'azul tameu. Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish are aligned with their reasonings. The Itmar we learned. Tamoicha Sadeo. Person sells his field. We go to Memches Amid Aleph. Bisman Shal Yovel Noyeg. Oh, he sells this field the time that Yovel was Noyeg. Now, let's imagine the Jewish time when people had Yovel. So when you sold your field that was in your family to somebody else, really that guy who bought it could only use it for its fruits, because all the deeds go back to the original owner when Yovel, or when Yovel was Noyeg. When Yovel was around, you only bought it for the sake of the fruits and not for the sake of ownership, because nobody owned anything forever. The Torah tells us that when Yovel comes, all original owners can repossess their lands. So Rabbi Yochanan says, maybe v'koire. Even though during the time of Yovel, people bought their fields, and they knew they're not going to own it forever, if they bought it off somebody, they still bring Bikurim and would read the Bikurim. Rish Lakish says, no, when Yovel was around, you only bought the field for the fruits. Maybe the Einakar you'll bring and not read. So the only time a person who bought a field and would read, according to Shlakish, would be if he bought it at a time like nowadays. Yovel's not around. When you buy something, it's forever. Only then you would be obligated to bring and read the Bikurim Parsha. So that's the Gemara's same thing. Rabbi Yochanan Amar maybe B'korei. Rabbi Yochanan says you could bring it and read it. Kinya Paris Kikina Guftami. Even though you own the fruits, during when Yovel's Noyeg, you could only use the field for the fruits. It's as if you bought the whole property itself, and you would read the Bikurim. Rish Lakish Amar, Rish Lakish says, maybe Veinakara, you would bring and don't read the Parsha of Bikurim. Why? Kinyan Paris Lav Kinyan Guftami. Just because you bought the fruits, you have a right to use the fruits up until the Yovel, but then you're going to have to give back the land. So it's you never really own the property itself, and therefore, if you bring Bikurim from that land, you would bring it, but don't read the Parsha of Bikurim. Now the Gemara says it's Richa. I need both cases of Machlekes Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. One case is what we discussed, a regular case. A man during nowadays bought a property just for its fruits. Machlekes Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, if you would bring and read the Bikurim. And another case is a man bought a property specifically during the time of Yovel. And there again, Rabbi Yochanan says maybe v'kairi, and Rish Lakish says maybe v'einikairi. So why do I need two different scenarios where Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish argue if Kinyan Peres is Kinyan Aduf Gami or not? So the Gemara says, I need both cases. If we just say the first case of man buys a property just for its fruit, and by he Kamar Rish Lakish, in that case, Rish Lakish says, when he bought the fruits, when he bought the fruits of the land, he only bought it for the fruits. He does not even thinking about the property itself. Therefore, Rish Lakish says maybe the Einakara. But the case by Yovel, during the time of Yovel, you're also thinking about owning the property, because even when Yovel is Noyeg, if you bought a property, you have a right to put a swimming pool there, and to use it for put a cave there, or make a laundromat, or where people wash their clothing. So therefore, you really technically more own the property during the time that Yovel is Noyeg. So I might think he would agree to Rabbi Yochanan that during the time that Yovel is Noyeg, you would maybe v'korei. So the answer is no, you may be v'einakari, because at the end of the day, this land is going to revert back to its original owner. If we just say the case by Yovel, B'hakama Rabbi Yochanan. On there, Rabbi Yochanan says maybe v'karei, because you own the property itself, because you have a right to create a swimming pool. But if you just buy a field when Yovel is not noyeg, and you're buying it just specifically for the produce, for the fruits of that field, Ema Maidelele Rish Lakish. I might think he would agree to Rish Lakish that you would be maybe the Eina Karet. Tzricha, that's why you need both cases. Tashma, come in here. Hakoini Ila, the Brisa says, if you buy a tree, Vikar Ka'oi, and you buy the property underneath the tree, so let's say it's a pomegranate tree, so maybe you would bring Bikurim Vikari. So you see that the only time you can bring and read the Bikurim, if you specifically in the contract it says that you bought the land underneath the tree. So this is a proof according to Rish Lakish, because as long as you didn't buy the land, then you would be maybe ve'ena karet. Answers the Gemara. Here we're talking about bisman she'ein hayovel noyer, when yovel is not around. So here, if it's yovel is not around, so when you buy the land, you're actually owning it forever. See, the question was against Rish Lakish. According to Rish Lakish, anytime you're buying a tree with the land, who cares if you buy the land? It's going to revert back to its original owner. So it's as if you don't own the land. So why does the Brisa say maybe v'kairei? So the answer is because the Brisa is talking about a time that Yovel is not noyeg, and therefore it's not a question against Rish Lakish. Tashma, come in here. Again, another question against Rish Lakish. If you buy 2 trees in a field of your friend, you bring and you don't read the Pekurim Parsha. But if you buy 3 trees, so when you buy 3 trees in a field all at once, even though if it's not written in the contract, it is assumed that you bought the land underneath, and therefore maybe v'karet, you will bring Bekurim and read the Parsha of Bekurim. Wait a second, you read the Parsha of Bekurim. You would read the Parsha of Bekurim. That's a little bit difficult to understand, because it's all these lands are going to revert back to its original owner. Who cares if you own the property underneath? It reverts back to its original owner. And Rish Lakish says that once something reverts back to its original owner, it's maybe ve'eina karet. And says the Gemara, Hochinami, that Mishnah is talking about bisman she'ein hayovel noyeg, when yovel is not around, not being kept, and therefore you buy something, it's permanent. So if you're buying something permanent with the land, it's maybe v'karet. Now the Gemara says another thing, a very interesting thing. Rav Chizda said, Machloikis b'yovel sheni, aval b'yovel rishim divrei hakol maybe v'karet. There was the first time the Jews kept yovel, the first 50 years. So then, if you bought a piece of land during the first 50 years after Kibush Haaretz, right, after Yeshua's time, so during those first 50 years, even everybody would agree it's maybe v'karet. Even though the lands would have been returned when Yovel came around, since it wasn't time tested, it never happened. So people, when they bought their properties, Rav Chizda said, people, even according to Rish Lakish, you thinking that you're buying it forever, and the one that sold it thinking he's selling it forever, and because of that, therefore, the purchaser would be able to maybe bring the Bikurim and read the Bikurim, because it's in his mind and in the seller's mind, he really owns the property underneath. But by Yovel Sheni, once people saw that it's put to effect, that it really does happen, that when Yovel comes, the lands revert back to its original owner. So from that first Yovel and onwards, then if you purchase a property, that's when Rish Lakish says maybe ve'eina karet. So therefore, the kati lo samach daiti, because by the first Yovel, people wasn't sure if this is going to work, even though the Torah says it's supposed to happen by the first Yovel. People weren't sure. So therefore, Loi Kasha have another answer. Ha b'yovel rishon, ha b'yovel sheni. When does the Brisa say, or these Mishnayos say, maybe v'kairei? It's during the first Yovel. Before the first Yovel happened, then it would be maybe v'kairei. But by the Yovel sheni, by the Yovel once already happened, then by Yovel sheni, by the second time, and people were more familiar with the concept of lands being returned to their original owner, once that happened, only then you say maybe ve'eina kairei. So it's not a question from these two brises, again, Reb Shlakish, because both of these Mishnayos are talking about b'yovel rishon. So the Gemara says like this. Now the Gemara is going to say that maybe it's a machloikis tanoi, is kinya peris kikin on a gufdami or not. Maybe that's the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. And then the Gemara is going to say, no, it's not a machlokes tanoim. Because if it was a machlokes tanoim, then you don't need Rabbi Yochanan or Shlokish to argue about the same thing. Let us say it's a machlokes tanoim. Menayin, how do I know? This is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon are saying, how do I know that if someone purchases someone purchases a field from his father, the hikdisha, and then made it hegdish. So man, Yaakov, let's say, is the father. He sells his field to Reuven, and Reuven was magdish the field. And then his father died. Well, when his father died, the field was already in the hands of hegdish. How do I know I treat that field as if Reuven inherited that land? What's the difference if he inherited it? Well, if he inherited that land, the Torah tells us that if you inherit a land and then you donate it to Hegdish, and you don't redeem it back from Hegdish, when Yovel comes, it goes to the Kahanim. So here, this guy inherited the land after he was Magdish the field. So how do I know I treat that as an inherited land? Talmud Loima, imistei miknosai, ashaloi imistei achuzasai. If you purchase a field, then if you purchase a field that's not a inherited field, then it returns back to the original owner by Yovel. For example, if Reuven purchased a field from Shimon, and then Reuven sold the field, Reuven was makdish the field to Hegdish, and Hegdish turned around and sold it to Levi. So now, when Yovel comes, Levi returns the field back to Shimon. He was the original owner of the field. It was Reuven who made it Hegdish. So that is the din by Stei Miknosei. But this case, Reuven purchased the field from his father and then was Magdish it. And then, let's say, even if Hegdish sold it to somebody else, Reuven did not redeem that field. Then Reuven's father died, Yaakov. So we treat it as an inherited field. So when Yovel comes, that field goes to the Kahanim. How do I know that? Because the Torah tells us only if you purchase a field, that's not an inherited field. A field that was never set up to become your inherited field, that's considered as a stay miknasai. We're going to exclude this. This would always had the potential to become your inherited field, and we'll treat it as such. Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Meir says, I disagree with that. That's considered as if you purchased the field. So it's really not considered an inherited field. It's considered a stay miknosai field. What is considered an inherited field? Simple. A person who purchased the field from his father, and his father died, and then he made the field hegdish. How do I know I treat that as an inherited field? Here, the death of his father occurred before the hegdish. So how do I know I treat that as a stei achuza? If it's only a purchase field, but not an inherited field. If at the time that you were makdashit, it was not an inherited field, that's considered a stay mikna. Let's exclude this one, which is an inherited field, and then you were makdashit, so we'll treat it as an inherited field. Now, again, so there is a difference between an inherited field and a non-inherited field, a purchase field. If a person purchased the field, gave it to Hegdish, begged it to Hegdish, and Hegdish turned around and sold it to somebody else, when Yovel comes, that original owner of that field will get back his property from the person that Hegdish sold it to. That's called a stay mikna. But if a person inherited a field and then made it Hegdish, so then if he made it Hegdish and Hegdish sold it to somebody else, and he never redeemed it from that other person, at that point, and the Yovel will come, this field was like forfeited and given over to the Kahana. But the chiddush of Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Shimon is that even if you were magdish the field before you inherited it, hey, pardon me, Pardon me. All right. Kid nearly fell. Okay, so the Gemara says like this: the ilu, according to the ilu, Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Shimon, according to Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Shimon, if your father died and then you were makdish the field, I don't need a pasuk to tell me that's a steiachuza. Of course, that's a steiachuza. The chiddush is that even if you were makdish the field and you were makdish the field prior to your father dying, we're going to treat it as a steiachuza. My love, this is the argument. When a person buys a field off his father, it's almost as if he bought the gufa karka itself. Kinya peres kinya chuftami. Uvaha b'misas aviv. When your father died, subsequently, when the father died, okay. So in our case, Reuven bought the field off his father Yaakov. Reuven now owns the peres plus the guf. So then, when his father died, nothing else was given to Reuven. He always owned the guf. The lo yaris lo midi. He didn't inherit anything. The hilkach therefore meis aviv acha chedisha tzricha ka. He didn't inherit anything. So therefore, I need a pasuk to tell me that when your father dies and then you will magdish it, even though nothing more happened, because you always consider it as if you own the gufa karka, still we'll treat that as a steiachuza. And even though it came to your possession as a stei mikna, we'll treat it as a stei achuza. That's the chiddush of the pasuk. Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Shimon Savri kina paris laki kina govdami. Certainly, when Reuven bought the field, it's always going to be a stei mikna, and you never own the guf karka itself. V'ha b'misas aviv, when his father died, hashu the kayaris. Now he's going to inherit. I don't need a pasuk because now he's owning. When his father died, he's now getting to own the gufa karka, and therefore, if he's magdish it, I don't need a pasuk to tell me that's a steiachuza, because you gained something when his father died. The chi, it's the kra. When do I need a pasuk? When you magdish it, and then the father died. Oh, you magdish it first, and then the father died, to treat that as a steiachuza. That's what I need the pasuk for. So basically, the Gemara just said that the machlokes of Rabbi Yochanan and Shlakish is the same machlokes as Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir holds like Rabbi Yochanan, Kinya Peres Kinya Gufdami, and Rish Lakish holds like Rabbi Yehuda. And says the Gemara, it's not a machlokes. Rav Nachman Yitzchak Loilam Emelach Baalmik Sab Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Shimon Kinya Peres Kinya Gufdami. Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Shimon always hold like Rabbi Yochanan, Kinya Peres is Kinya Gufdami. So then why don't I need the pasuk to teach me the easier chiddush of what Rameir is teaching me? Since the Kinya Peres is Kinya Guftami, when the father died, he didn't get anything because as a stay in Mikna, he owned the Gufa Karka. So when his father died, he didn't get anything more. So maybe I don't treat that as a stay achuz, and that's the chiddush of the pasuk. So how do I know to teach you chiddush that when you were magdish and afterwards the father died, you also treat that as a stay achuza? So the Gemara says, they found another pasuk that says the same thing. The Torah could say, if you purchase a field that's you didn't inherit, my misdei achuzasai. What does the Torah add? It's a field that you didn't inherit. The Torah could have left out the word field. So we learn like this: this it has to be a field that you purchased that would never had the potential to become an inherited field. Let's exclude the case that even though Reuven purchased the field and then he was makdashit, and then afterwards his father died, but this field was always potential to be Reuven's field. So therefore, that would not be treated as a stay mikna, but rather would be treated as a stei achuza. It could be an inherited field, and therefore we'll treat it as such. So the Gemara just backed away from the machlokes, saying the machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Shlakish is aligned with the machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara says like this: Amar Rav Yosef. The Gemara concludes this parak. If Rabbi Yochanan would have said this concept that when you buy the Paris, it's as if you bought the property itself, we would never be able to put our hands. He put his hands and feet in the Beis Medrash. In other words, one parsha of the Torah would have been go up in smoke. Why? Rabbi Yossi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, brothers that inherited their father, they are as if they purchased the field from each other, and therefore they have to redivide up the land when Yovel comes. When Yovel comes, they have to redivide up their land, because we don't say, "Oh, this was your field that always belonged to you." No, it's as if when their father died, they're basically selling each one the right of the inheritance, and they own their properties that they inherited temporarily. And when Yovel comes, we put it all back into the pot again, and they redivide it again. That's what Rabbi Yochanan said. Comes out that all this time, when a person inherited his field, and he had a bunch of brothers, he's not really owning the field. No one really owns anything. You only own it to the fruits of the land, because you're gonna have to return it back by Yovel. If Rabbi Yochanan held that just the fact that you only own the fruits, it's not as if you own the property itself, and therefore you would be maybe the Eina Koira, like Mishkachas and the Ma'aser Bikurim, will never have anybody bringing a Bikurim and maybe the Koire, that's what the Gemara means, bring Bikurim and read the Parsha Bikurim, El Chad Bar Chad Ad Yeshu Benun. Only if it's a Ben Yochid after Ben Yochid after Ben Yochid, because every group of children, boys that are inheriting their father, they're only owning their property until Yovel, and then they have to redivide it again. So everybody owns Kinyan Paris. And if Rabbi Yochanan held that if you own Kinyan Paris, you would be maybe Ve'ena Kari, then nobody would bring Bekurim and read the Parsha Bekurim. But now that Rabbi Yochanan said that the Kinyan Paris is Kinyan Gufta, everybody who owns even though you're going to eventually redivide it by Yovel, and you only own the fruits, but you don't really own the property itself, you would still be considered as if you own the property itself, and you would be maybe the koire. Despite the fact that Gemara seemed to go with Rabbi Yochanan's opinion, the Gemara says, "Amarava kra umasnisa misayle Rish Lakish." I have a pasuk and a brisa that seems to align itself with what Rish Lakish says. Kra, the pasuk says like this: "The mispa shnei tvuas yimkalach." The mispa shnei tvuas yimkalach. With the Torah tells us when you sell a field, and the purchaser should know that according to the amount of the fruits, it was sold to you. So the Torah seems to imply that when you're selling the rights of a field to Yovel, you're only selling the rights, or the owner only has the right to use the property for its fruits and nothing else. That's what it seems to imply. So we see Kinyan Paris is lavke Kinyan Guftami. And then the Gemara's Rosh Hashanah says, Masnita, the Brisa also seems to agree with Rish Lakish. Tanya, we learned to the Brisa, a Bechor will take Pishnayim in a field. He will be able to take Pishnayim. And a Bechor always takes Pishnayim, double, right? Even though when his father died, the field was not in his father's possession because he sold the field. But when Yovel comes, the field gets returned back to the estate. Then the Bechor will take Pishnayim. Why? Because when the purchaser bought it, we'll consider it as if he only bought the fruits, but not the deed property itself. And therefore, it was always considered the father's property. And once it's returned by Yovel, the Bechor will take Pishnayim. On the other hand, if you would hold Kinyan Aperis, Kinyan Aguftami, the Bechor would not be able to take Pishnayim, because the Bechor only takes Pishnayim what's really physically in the father's possessions when he died. Suppose, let's say, a father bought a lottery ticket, then died. Then we find out later that he won the lottery. Well, when he died, the money wasn't in his possession. So the Bechor would not take Pishnayim, would divide it amongst all the brothers equally. So only if the father, whatever the father owns physically when he dies, we give the rights to the Bechor to take Pishnayim. The fact is that when a field is returned to his father b'yovel, we always consider it as if it was in the father's possession, because Kinyan Paris lav Kinyan Aguftami, and that's why the Bechor takes Pishnayim. This seems to say Kinyan Paris lav Kinyan Aguftami. This brisa seems to be approved to Rish Lakish. Amar Abaya says, Naktinen, we have a rule. Bal nichse ishtay tzarach hasha. A husband that's fighting a lawsuit against his wife. Let's say somebody's suing his wife's field, claiming it's not hers. if he wants to defend his wife, he needs special position, power of attorney, so to speak, that he representing his wife. Because he doesn't own the field. It's his wife's field. And he just has the right to eat the payros, but he doesn't own the field. So the lawsuit is against his wife. So if he wants to represent his wife, he needs special permission from his wife to represent her in court. And this was not said if he's being sued for the fruits, right? If the lawsuit is not just against the land itself, but the fruit itself, then once it's written on that he's a party of this lawsuit, so then he could defend his wife. Since the lawsuit is against him regarding the fruits, so he could already defend her when it comes to taking away the property itself. So therefore, in that case, he would not need a special written permission from his wife to defend her. Since he's defending himself in this lawsuit, he can defend his wife at the same time, although he does not own the property. We just finished a hard sugya of kinyan aperis, kinyan aguf dami, or kinyan aperis lav kinyan dami. Let's do the Mishnah and then we'll end. The Mishnah says on memchesamid beis hanizokim, damages. So a person, let's say, who damaged somebody, has to pay damages, or his ox damaged somebody. So the Torah tells us that if the mazik does not have money to pay, then he could pay the person that he owes the money to with karka. Instead of paying cash, he can pay karka. So the Mishnah says shamalim be'idis, but if he's going to pay, he has to pay from his best karka, the damages that he caused or his damages that his animal caused. If he owes somebody money, he's paying a debt and he doesn't have cash to pay it, he could pay with the middle of the road type of karka. Uksubis isha biziburas, for paying the debt that a husband owns for his wife, for the ksuba, he can give her, instead of cash, the worst piece of land that he owns. Okay, obviously they're getting the same amount. It's just when you're getting a better piece of land, you're getting less. And when you're getting a worse piece of land, you're getting a lot more. But there's advantages to hold a better piece of land simply because there's much more of a market for people who are interested in purchasing it. Rameir says, Af ksubas isha, when it comes to paying the ksuba of your wife, it's bebaininus. We use the middle of the road karka. One cannot foreclose on property that you have a lien on. Let's say you have a lien on a property and it was sold to somebody else. So you can't go collect from that property. Let's say you owed money, you want to collect it back, you can't collect from that money. So you can't foreclose on a property if a person has property that's free and clear, that's available, that he did not yet sell. So that's what it means. You can't collect from properties that you have a lien on. If you have, in place of that, if there's free and clear properties, you can't go foreclose on property he sold. Even what's left over, the person that owes you money has the worst piece of land, and you're a Baal Choiv, and technically you could collect from Beininis, but if he has free and clear Ziburis, you can't go foreclose on Beininis he sold to somebody else. You can't collect from the possessions of Yisayimim, element is Ziburis, only from the worst piece of land. It's because once their father's not around and you're doing collecting, you could only collect from his worst piece of land. Let's say the Mishnah says, Ein Matziyim, and all this, we'll see how this all relates to our Mishnahs. Ein Matziyim la'achilas peiros l'shvach kakois l'mzoin ha'isha v'habonis m'nechasim m'shabadim. One by one. The Mishnah says you can't collect. Let's say a person guaranteed, he was a title insurer, and he guaranteed a property that he sold, and then after he sold it, it was found out that he sold a stolen piece of property. Therefore, if he guaranteed that property, not only does he have to make good on the property that he give back the money, but let's say the guy invested into the property, or the fruits, or the property went up in value, he still has to make the purchaser whole on that too. And the purchaser has a right to collect on that. So the Mishnah says, Ein Maitziyin, he cannot collect eating for the fruits that he lost, or for the capital gains, the appreciation of the property that he's owed, that was stolen from him. Again, he purchased the property. The person that sold it to him guaranteed that this is that it's a free and clear property. It turns out that property that he sold was stolen. So the purchaser wants to collect back the money that he invested into the property plus the appreciation of the property. So he can't collect from that. Or for collecting for the food for the wife and the children after a person died, his wife and children have a right because of the ksuba to have money for provisions for food. They can't collect this debt. They can't foreclose on properties that were sold. They made tikkun oilim for the betterment of the world. This whole Mishnah is because of tikkun oilim, because of the betterment of the world, and we're going to discuss it more. Whoever finds an item on the street, right, and he wants to return it to its owner, and the owner said that the owner said, "Thank you for returning it to me, but there was much more here," and this person said, "No, this is all that I found." So let's say he found $1,000 and he's returning it, and now the owner says, "Thank you for returning it, but I suggest that you found 2,000 and you're just giving me back 1,000." So that's called a moedim b'miktzah. So normally you would have to swear. The Mishnah says lo yishava. The finder does not have to swear. Because of a betterment of the world, we don't enforce that the finder of an object of a loss of money or whatever it is, we don't subject that person to any type of shvuah. Okay, Be'ez Hashem, we will continue this parak tomorrow.